The Battle of the Bulge was the last major German offensive campaign on the Western Front during WW II. On December 16, 1944, the German attack launched a final push designed to reverse the outcome of the war and achieve victory for Hitler and his empire. Due to a combination of Allied overconfidence, preoccupation with Allied offensive plans, and poor weather for aerial reconnaissance, the Germans were successful. American forces bore the brunt of the assault and incurred their highest casualties of any operation during the war. The fight for fuel supplies at Elsenborn Ridge and Lanzerath would prove to be a critical component, as the flow of petrol could ultimately turn the tide of the war itself. The movie opens with a vast snow-covered forest stretching out for acres. Sounds of explosions and gunfire can be heard from a distance, but no visuals of war could be seen yet. In the middle of the forest, Kappa is kneeling on the snow, listening to the explosions getting louder all around him. As he makes his way through the woods, Kappa sees dozens of soldiers hiding in the snow who start shooting at him. Since he had caught them by surprise, they weren't able to catch him fast enough as he ran through them, rushing as fast as possible. Although he had bullets flying all around him, Kappa kept his head down and continued to run. In a different part of the forest, a group of soldiers are heading to an unknown location that is close enough. Meanwhile, 4 soldiers are stranded in the woods after their jeep and radio stop working. Their leader attempts to contact help for several minutes, but is unable to do so. Returning to his group, he asks them if they had any luck with their jeep, but he is informed that the cold has caused it to completely break down. Hearing gunshots all around them and realizing that they were surrounded by the German army, Private Daniel orders the group to burn everything so their enemies don't find it, and tells them to prepare to flee. In another part of the forest, Corporal Jack joins his team, who have been hiding from the Germans and keeping watch. He informs his team that he didn't get a clear look at how many soldiers were surrounding them, but that they were nearby. While grabbing his gun, one of his soldiers begins to panic and tries to tell his commanding officer that they need to fight them off, but Jack warns him to remain quiet. He then gives 3 of his men to spread out to create a perimeter and strictly orders them not to shoot until he does. While waiting vigilantly, they see a German soldier approaching on his horse, looking around the area. Disobeying orders, Adam attempts to shoot the soldier, but his gun jammed, immediately stopped by one of his teammates. The group remains quiet until the enemy soldier rides away. Then Jack trains his gun at Adam and threatens to shoot him if he ever disobeys his orders again. Meanwhile, Kappa runs into some more German soldiers, but manages to use the element of surprise to escape. Major Mike arrives at the safe house with his team and is greeted by one of the soldiers named Hash. As soon as he arrives, Mike asks if General Omar has already arrived, but he is told that he has not. Hash also tells Mike that we can perform every task as per his specifications. Mike then asks if the plans have been fixed, and he is disappointed when he gets a negative answer. When he pushes the stressed soldier, Hash promises to double their efforts. Calming down, Mike continues to ask about the other officers, and he is disappointed when he is told that they have not reported yet. Out in the wilderness, Pessy's group gathered together, attempting to find the right way to the safe house. While they wait, Jack and Rudy begin a conversation, talking about their humble background. After a brief rest, the group continues their journey, hoping they are heading in the right direction. Meanwhile, Daniel's group continues to start the jeep when they see their people arrive and breathe a sigh of relief. Lieutenant Shepard began asking the group what had happened, learning about the failed battery. The man that seemed like the leader of the group assists them, but Daniel senses something strange about the man. Shepard then asks the men if anyone knew they were out there, but Daniel and his 2 friends tell him that no one had that knowledge. As soon as he finds out they are all alone, Shepard orders the men to be executed, revealing that he and his men were German soldiers who had infiltrated the army. Daniel, who had seen the whole thing from afar, quickly hides, shocked at his men's sudden death. Out in the wilderness, Jack and his group run into other American soldiers who offer them food and transportation. Although he allows his team to join the other, Jack and Rudy discuss the situation, sensing that it all seems a bit strange. Feeling on the edge, Jack orders Rudy to tell the others to keep their eyes open and follows the other soldiers. Meanwhile, Kappa arrives at a minefield set up by his fellow American soldiers, closely followed by an army of Germans. As soon as he crosses the field, the soldiers begin to fire on their enemies, while Kappa suddenly begins to hyperventilate and eventually passes out. At the safe zone, Mike is inside a tent looking at the maps, angry that he is still unable to get information on the German armies. Suddenly, General Omar arrives and begins to discuss the situation of their soldiers, telling him that the bitter cold has made it difficult for their people to function. Mike fills in the general with information on their inventory, and weaponry, explaining his theory that Hitler had insurgents in many of their divisions, causing them problems. Sadly, Mike also informs Omar that he didn't have large platoons to fight off the advancing armies, only small ones scattered all over the place, attempting to do what they could. When Omar asks for advice, Mike tells the general that the German army would need to fill up on fuel, and the only place to find it would be their reserve. The men realize that they are onto something and decide to pursue the lead. Meanwhile, Jack and his soldiers receive a ride, unaware they are amongst infiltrating Germans who are trying to extract information from them. When Kappa finally gains consciousness, he finds himself in a makeshift clinic being looked after by a nurse. Thanking the nurse, Kappa goes to speak to the man who saved his life and the only officer. The man explained to Kappa that he and his men, only the colored people, had remained alive. Kappa reveals that the Germans were headed their way with full force and explains that the last order he received was to hold it off at all costs. The sergeant explains that the only reason the Germans have not attacked them yet was because of the impressive oil reserve that they desperately wanted. Back at the safe zone, Mike is finally able to make communication with the pilots, and he is frustrated when they're unable to give him the information he wanted. Ordering them to keep looking for the German army on the ground, he angrily hangs up. After watching his men die, Daniel decides to walk several miles until he finally sees a familiar face, a sergeant keeping card. After communicating with the man for a few minutes, Daniel decides to try the radio again and is happy when it finally works, connecting him to one of the pilots he knows. Daniel informs the pilot that he had eyes on the German army, telling him that they were right in front of them. The pilot quickly informs Mike of what he has seen, explaining that it must be the whole German army, and informs him of the coordinates. After receiving his information, Mike allows the pilot to retreat and head back to them. Back at the clinic, Kappa speaks to the remaining men who are eager to fight to avenge their fallen friends, but he decides to stay up for the moment as he doesn't want to lose more men. Inside the clinic, medical professionals struggle to treat their patients as they have begun to run out of supplies. A few hours later, Jack and the disguised German army arrive at the clinic, and Kappa, along with his sergeant, is happy to see them. Approaching Kappa, Shepard begins to ask questions about the equipment that was still intact, but Kappa explains that they were just about to destroy it. Shepard informs Kappa that the order has changed, and that they should take patience and evacuate. One Shepard walks away. Jack expresses his interest in helping Kappa, and the Lastid asks them to help him gather up the wounded. Meanwhile, Mikey returns to the tent and tells Omar that their pilot can confirm German tanks and troops, which were in the thousands. Mikey came up with a plan to bottleneck the German troops and forces them southeast, where a few of their armies were located. He also explains that since it was rough terrain, the Germans would have a hard time supplying their troops. Back at the clinic, Kappa and his soldiers have managed to evacuate all the patients into the jeeps until they are suddenly stopped by Shepard and his men, telling them that they're not allowed to take the vehicles. When Kappa refuses to leave without the cars, Shepard changes his mind and allows the soldiers to use the vehicles. Once the cavalry leaves, Shepard orders his men to dispose of any remaining American outposts and the wounded in the clinic. He then orders his men to transport all of the oil to get it to the remaining troops. Kappa and his group hadn't moved out long before they ran into Daniel, who was being carried by two of his friends. While Daniel was resting, he noticed the jeep that the English-speaking Germans had taken and questioned his friends about where they had found it. When they tell him what is happening, he informs them of the threat around them. Realizing they were Germans, Kappa and his group decide to return and fight. After getting ready and coming up with a plan, the group set to ambush the arriving army. Adam, who had fled from his group unaware that he was walking back into enemy territory, returns to the clinic and informs the men about the Germans. After patting his back for a job well done, one of the German soldiers shoots him in the head. Heading out into the roads, Kappa and Rudy saw the Germans and waved them over as if they had no idea who they were. Once they were close enough, Kappa and his men began firing on the Germans, firing their tank at the fleeing group. After being pushed back by the Americans, the German army fled as far as they could and began to retaliate. When Kappa and his team finally make it to the ammunition pile, they find a heavily hurt Adam, who offers to stay behind to manually cause the explosion. Thanking him for his bravery, they hand him the flare and continue to their next post. The aggressive battle continued on all fronts as both Americans and Germans struggled to hold their post. The now recovered Germans are putting up a hard fight, and Kappa knows it is time for them to move out as the place is about to explode. Realizing what the Americans were planning, Shepard charges his men out of their fort and sees Adam holding a bomb next to the pile of grenades. Before they could stop him, Adam ignited the bomb, covering the entire place in flames. Kappa and his men had been given enough time to escape. Back in the tent, Omar arrives and tells Mike that he has found himself detained for a bit because he was suspected as a German infiltrator. He had been let go after they had made sure of his identity. Omar and Mike had a brief laugh about the situation and continued to discuss the line of the war. Omar asks Mike what his advice would be and the major points at the location he believes their last stand should be, and the general accepts it. Once Omar leaves, Mike gives out the order that they would be heading to warn and informs his soldiers to send out the word for every American soldier to turn back and head to Bastion to fight. Hearing the orders, Kappa and his men, relishing in their victory and craving for more, start up their jeeps and begin their journey to Bastion. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.